The new hire walked into the office on his first day, holding a plastic badge that looked too new for someone his age. He was 85 years old. The younger staff glanced at him, whispering, unsure if he was someone's grandfather who got lost. What they didn't know was that Walter Briggs had built this company from nothing 60 years ago, right here in Cleveland, Ohio. He was the original founder, the man whose name was once on the front door, before a single decision cost him everything. Now he was back, not for money, but to fix a lifelong regret. Walter's new job as a mail clerk was simple: deliver envelopes, push a cart, and stay invisible. The staff barely noticed him, treating him like background noise. That was exactly what he wanted. For now, being overlooked meant he could quietly move around the building, watching how things had changed. He noticed how rushed everyone looked, glued to screens, avoiding eye contact. It wasn't the warm, close-knit company he had once dreamed of. It was cold and mechanical, focused on profit above people. Walter could already feel the weight of his regret returning. As Walter pushed his cart past a glass wall conference room, he spotted the company's logo. It looked sleek and modern, but it wasn't the one he had designed. The name Briggs Industries had been erased, replaced by initials that meant nothing. His picture, once displayed proudly in the lobby, was gone. He was a ghost in the empire he had created. Memories came flooding back. Long nights in a garage, scribbling plans on napkins, hiring his first employees. He had built this place like a family. Now it felt like a stranger's house, cold and unrecognizable. Walter thought back to the moment it all went wrong. Decades earlier, he sold majority control to investors who promised to expand the company, but instead pushed him out. He had told himself it was for growth, that stepping aside was for the greater good. But deep down, he knew he had betrayed his workers. They had trusted him, and he let them down. Those investors gutted pensions, forced layoffs, and treated people like numbers. Walter had walked away with money, but also a wound that never healed. Now he had returned to see what was left. As he delivered mail across departments, Walter saw firsthand how employees were struggling. Young faces sat behind cubicles, bags under their eyes, working late into the night without thanks. He overheard a manager demanding unpaid overtime and threatening to replace anyone who refused. Walter clenched the cart handle. This wasn't the company he built. He once promised to protect his workers, to give them stability and respect. That promise had been broken. He knew this wasn't just about his regret, it was about all the people still paying the price for his one mistake. Walter studied the company culture from the shadows. Everything was profit-driven, charts and numbers plastered on walls, no mention of people or values. He saw talented employees ignored, while loud managers rose by cutting corners. The kindness that once defined his company was gone. It hurt to admit it, but his absence had allowed greed to take over. Walter realized this wasn't just regret about the past. It was about the future of everyone still stuck inside this system. He hadn't just lost his legacy, he had abandoned it, and the consequences were staring him in the face. Then he saw him, Victor Hale, the current CEO. Victor had once been a junior executive Walter trusted, a man who had promised loyalty. But Walter remembered the betrayal. Victor had been one of the loudest voices convincing the board to push him out. Now Victor walked the halls like a king, employees scrambling out of his way. Walter's chest tightened. Victor represented everything that had gone wrong. If anyone carried the blame for twisting the company into this machine, it was him. Walter knew this was the man he would eventually have to face. Walter began noticing how Victor operated. He watched as Victor took credit for projects that employees had worked tirelessly on. In meetings, Victor belittled staff, making them afraid to speak up. Walter's anger simmered. This was the man who had stolen his legacy, and now he was stealing the work of others. Walter kept his head down, playing the role of harmless old clerk, but inside his resolve hardened. He hadn't returned just to watch silently. He had come back to confront the betrayal that had started decades ago, and he wasn't leaving without answers. As weeks passed, Walter discovered more about the company's practices. Layoffs were common, benefits slashed, pensions gone. He heard whispers of financial manipulation to boost stock prices. The workers were disposable, while executives collected massive bonuses. Walter realized the company had become everything he once swore it never would. It wasn't just personal betrayal anymore. It was moral failure on a massive scale. His decision to sell out had allowed all this. He carried the guilt, but now he had the chance to face it. He couldn't undo the past, but maybe he could still change the present. During his rounds, Walter met Maria, a young employee in marketing. She stayed late most nights, producing work her boss always dismissed. She reminded him of his younger self, ambitious, creative and hopeful, but being crushed under the weight of office politics. They struck up small conversations, and slowly, Maria began trusting him. She confided that she was thinking of quitting, tired of being overlooked and used. Walter felt protective of her. She didn't deserve to suffer for a system he had helped create. In Maria, Walter saw a reason to keep fighting, beyond just his own regret. Through Maria, Walter learned even more about the company's decline. She showed him how ideas were stolen, how promotions were based on favoritism, not merit. She told him about her co-workers who had been forced out after years of service, left with nothing. Walter listened carefully, guilt pressing heavier with each story. It was the same broken cycle he had once promised would never exist under his leadership. Maria's stories gave him fuel. This wasn't just about setting the record straight, it was about defending the people still inside, who had no one left to fight for them. Walter wrestled with what to do. Should he reveal who he really was? Part of him wanted to stay hidden, gathering evidence and striking at the right moment. Another part of him felt he should step forward and declare his identity immediately. But his flaw was clear. He hated confrontation. It had been his weakness years ago, when he failed to stand up to the investors. Now that same hesitation was back. He knew time was against him. At 85, he couldn't wait forever. He had to choose whether to stay silent or finally raise his voice. While delivering documents to an old storage room, Walter stumbled across company archives. Dusty boxes contained contracts and memos from decades past. Curiosity took over. He flipped through yellowed papers and found evidence that shook him. There were memos signed by Victor, proving he had deliberately manipulated the board to push Walter out. Victor had spread lies, painting Walter as unfit to lead. The betrayal wasn't just opportunistic. It had been calculated. Walter's stomach turned as he realized the man he once trusted had planned his downfall all along. The truth was worse than he remembered. The discovery hit him like a blow. For years, Walter had blamed himself for being weak, for selling too much control. Now he saw that Victor had orchestrated it. But instead of relief, Walter felt deeper regret. He had been blind, too trusting, too unwilling to fight. The betrayal was real, but so was his failure to stop it. Decades later, the damage remained. The company was poisoned, and it started with that betrayal. Walter knew he couldn't undo the past, but if he let this truth stay buried, he would fail all over again. Walter's fear of confrontation paralyzed him. He stared at the documents, hands shaking, wondering if it was even worth the fight. He had spent decades avoiding the pain of this truth. Maybe it was easier to let it go, to walk away again. The thought of facing Victor terrified him. The man had all the power, while Walter was just an old clerk with no authority. The same weakness that destroyed him once threatened to destroy him again. Walter questioned if he was strong enough this time, or if he was destined to repeat history. It was Maria who pushed him forward. One evening, Walter saw her standing up to her boss in a meeting, refusing to let him steal credit for her work again. Though her voice shook, she didn't back down. Walter felt a surge of pride. If this young woman could find the courage to fight for herself, then surely he could find the courage to fight for everyone. Her bravery lit something inside him. Walter realized he couldn't run from confrontation forever. If he wanted to make things right, he had to face the man who betrayed him. Walter gathered his evidence and went to Human Resources, hoping to present his findings. But when he tried to explain, they dismissed him immediately. They called him confused, told him he must have misunderstood old paperwork, and advised him to focus on his deliveries. He felt humiliated, treated like a senile old man instead of the company's founder. His words carried no weight, his identity still hidden. HR was in Victor's pocket, unwilling to listen. Walter walked out crushed, realizing that the official channels wouldn't work. If he wanted justice, he'd have to find another way. News of Walter snooping around eventually reached Victor. The CEO sent quiet warnings through managers, hints that the old man should stop asking questions or risk losing his job. Walter's badge was suddenly flagged for minor policy violations. It was clear he was being watched. For a moment, Walter thought of quitting. He was too old for games, too frail for battles. But then he remembered the faces of the employees he saw every day, exhausted and unappreciated. Quitting again would mean abandoning them, just like he had abandoned the workers decades ago. He couldn't do it twice. Walter spent sleepless nights replaying his past. He remembered the workers who had once thanked him for providing security, the families who depended on his promises. Their voices haunted him. He knew this was his last chance to redeem himself. Every step around the office now felt heavier, but also more determined. He wasn't just some old man with regrets anymore. He was a founder who had returned to finish what he started. Even if it cost him his job or his peace, he would face Victor and the truth head on. While digging deeper, Walter discovered something he had forgotten, a clause in the original founding documents. It gave him certain rights as a founder, rights that had never been fully revoked. It wasn't enough to reclaim control, but it was enough to demand his voice be heard. That small discovery gave him hope. He wasn't powerless after all. The company had buried his name, but legally, it couldn't erase him completely. With this leverage, he finally had a way to bring the truth into the light, and Victor wouldn't be able to silence him this time. The biggest surprise came when Maria revealed her secret. She wasn't just another overlooked employee. She was the granddaughter of Walter's first co-founder, Samuel. She had joined the company under a different name, trying to uncover what really happened to their family's legacy. Her grandfather had died heartbroken after losing everything in the same betrayal that destroyed Walter. Maria had been quietly researching for years, and she saw Walter as the missing piece. She told him she wasn't just helping out of kindness, she was fighting for her family's honor too. Maria shared her own collection of evidence, letters, old board transcripts, even family journals. Together with Walter's documents, they formed a clear story of fraud, betrayal, and stolen credit. Maria admitted she had been afraid to act alone. She thought no one would listen to her. But now, with Walter by her side, the pieces fit together. They weren't just two voices, they were the past and the future, united by the same injustice. Walter realized he wasn't alone anymore. He had an ally who cared just as deeply about setting things right. The two worked late nights, piecing everything together. They built a timeline of Victor's actions, showing how he manipulated votes, erased Walter's contributions, and stripped workers of their security. Walter was exhausted but driven, energized by Maria's determination. Each document they uncovered was another nail in Victor's lies. Walter knew they had enough to expose him, but timing was everything. They couldn't just file a complaint. It would be buried. They needed to reveal the truth publicly, in a way no one could ignore. That would be the only way to restore their family's legacies. The opportunity came when Victor announced a major press conference. He planned to unveil a new product line, one he claimed would redefine the future of the company. Walter and Maria recognized it as stolen work from younger engineers. This was Victor's moment of glory. If they acted then, in front of cameras and shareholders, the truth couldn't be silenced. It was risky, but it was the only chance. Walter prepared himself mentally. He wasn't going to let Victor rewrite history one more time. This time, Walter would be the one holding the microphone. The night before the conference, Walter and Maria rehearsed their plan. She would provide backup with documents and legal proof, while Walter would speak directly to the audience. He feared his voice might tremble, that no one would take him seriously. But Maria reminded him that truth carried its own power. For the first time in decades, Walter felt ready. This wasn't about revenge, it was about redemption. If he failed, at least he would fail trying, not hiding. That thought gave him peace. And with it, the courage to face the morning. The day of the conference, the room was packed with reporters, shareholders, and employees watching live streams. Victor stood tall on stage, smiling confidently as he began his speech. Cameras flashed. Walter, dressed in his simple clerk's sweater, slipped quietly toward the stage. Murmurs spread through the crowd as people noticed the old man stepping forward. Walter's heart pounded, but he kept walking. For decades he had been silent. Today he was finally ready to speak. He reached the stage, turned to the audience, and began to tell them who he really was. The room fell silent as Walter introduced himself as the original founder of the company. Shock spread across faces, some laughing in disbelief, others leaning forward to listen. He presented documents from the archives, showing how Victor had manipulated the board, betrayed him, and stolen credit. He explained how pensions had been cut and workers abandoned. The story was undeniable, each paper backed by proof. Victor tried to interrupt, but Walter pressed on, his voice steady. For the first time, the truth was out in the open, and everyone was listening. Chaos erupted. Shareholders shouted, demanding answers. Employees gasped as years of frustration boiled over. Cameras zoomed in on Victor's face as he fumbled, denying everything, but the evidence was too strong. Maria stepped forward with the final documents, sealing the case. Victor's confidence crumbled. The man who once walked the halls like a king now looked small, exposed, and humiliated. The public reckoning Walter had feared all his life was finally here. He hadn't reclaimed control of the company, but he had reclaimed the truth. The betrayal was no longer a secret. In the days that followed, Victor's downfall dominated headlines. Investigations began, shareholders demanded leadership changes, and employees felt heard for the first time in years. Walter didn't stay to enjoy the chaos. He had done what he came for. Sitting outside the building one last time, he felt a quiet peace. His name might never be restored on the door, but his story was finally told. Maria promised to carry the legacy forward, to rebuild the values they once dreamed of. For Walter that was enough. He had faced his regret and left it behind.